They warned me the mountains could break a person. What they did not warn me about was getting trapped in a blizzard cabin, alone, with a strong, silent, jaw-droppingly intense mountain guide named Nadia, who would keep me warm in ways I never, ever expected. I was just a burned-out Chicago journalist who needed a reset. 3 weeks in the mountains, fresh air, boring hikes, zero human drama. That was the plan. But the universe had other ideas. The moment that storm hit, and I mean hit, like the sky personally decided to punish me, I was already halfway up a ridge I had absolutely no business being on. Visibility dropped to zero in under 60 seconds. The wind was screaming. Ice was everywhere. And my very annoyed, very capable, very beautiful guide grabbed my arm with a grip like iron and said through gritted teeth, "Do exactly what I say and don't let go of me, not for 1 second." Her hands on my back felt like fire in the freezing chaos, and I was terrified, genuinely terrified, that it wasn't just the cold making me shiver. We ran. We scrambled. We barely made it to the emergency cabin on the ridge before the storm swallowed the world whole. And then it was just us. 4 walls, 1 small wood stove, 2 very wet, very cold strangers who clearly did not like each other. For 3 days, the blizzard didn't stop, and neither did whatever was building between us. By the time the roof started groaning under the weight of the snow, by the time I was pressed against her in the dark, both of us barely breathing, I understood something that changed everything. The real storm wasn't outside. It was the one building between us, slow and inevitable, the kind you can't outrun and can't survive alone. Stay with me, because what happens next, you are not ready. Let me back up. 3 weeks before that storm, I was sitting in my Chicago apartment at 2 a.m, staring at a blinking cursor on a blank screen, eating cold ramen out of the pot because I couldn't remember the last time I'd used a bowl like a normal human being. I was 31 years old, senior features writer at a magazine that had just told me I was creatively stagnant. My editor, who I had carried through his own nervous breakdown 3 years ago, by the way, actually used those exact words in a performance review. Creatively stagnant. I cried in the bathroom for 12 minutes and then went back to my desk and filed a story about artisan soap. That was the week I booked the mountain retreat. I'm not even a mountains person. I grew up in suburban Illinois. My idea of outdoor adventure was walking to a coffee shop without an umbrella. But something about the brochure, a photo of snow-covered peaks, a line about reconnecting with yourself in the silence of nature, reached into my chest and squeezed. I needed silence. I needed cold. I needed something that wasn't the inside of my own head. So I booked it. The Ridgeline Wilderness Experience. 8 days of guided hiking in the Colorado mountains in late November. Small group, experienced guides, meals included. The reviews all said things like life-changing and I found myself again. I figured even if I didn't find myself, at least I'd get some good material for an article. That's what I told myself. It's easier when you make everything work. The train ride was 6 hours of watching the flat Midwest tilt upward, plains surrendering to foothills, surrendering to something enormous and serious and white. I had my notebook. I had 3 podcasts I didn't listen to. I mostly just watched the mountains grow and felt something tight in my chest loosen, just slightly, for the first time in months. Ridgeline Base Lodge was a beautiful old timber building at the edge of a small mountain town called Halloway. Exposed beams, stone fireplace, the smell of wood smoke and pine resin so thick you could almost taste it. A handwritten chalkboard behind the front desk listed guide names and assignments. I found my name. Sarah Ellison. Guide, Nadia Voss. The woman behind the desk smiled when she saw me reading it. You've got Nadia. You're lucky. She's the best we have. Fair warning, though. She's not exactly chatty. I almost said that suited me fine. I was here for silence, after all. I should have said it. Should have committed to that energy. Instead, I turned around and walked directly into Nadia Voss. She was tall. Taller than I expected, with broad, capable shoulders and a posture that said she had never once apologized for taking up space in her life. Dark hair pulled back tight, strong jaw, a scar running through her left eyebrow so faint you had to be standing embarrassingly close to see it. I was standing embarrassingly close. She looked at me with dark eyes that assessed and categorized me in about 2 seconds, and what she found clearly did not impress her. "Ellison?" she said. "That's me." I stuck out my hand. "Sarah." She shook it once, firm. "Nadia, you brought the right boots?" I blinked. "Hello to you, too." Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. More like she'd considered one and decided against it on principle. "The boots," she said again. "I asked in the confirmation email." "I have boots." "Let me see them." 45 seconds after meeting this woman, I was sitting on a bench in the lodge lobby, unlacing my perfectly reasonable hiking boots, while she crouched in front of me with the focused expression of someone defusing a bomb, turned each one over in her hands, pressed the soles, and finally handed them back with a verdict of, "They'll do." "I'm so relieved," I said flatly. This time, the almost smile won. Just barely. Just for a second. "You're going to be difficult," she said. But the way she said it wasn't annoyed. It was almost amused, like she was recalibrating slightly. "Probably," I agreed. That was our introduction. By dinner, I had decided she was the most competent and most aggravating person I'd ever met. By the end of day 1 on the trail, I had started to revise that opinion, only slightly, and entirely against my will. She knew every inch of those mountains like they were an extension of her own body. She moved through terrain that made me gasp and swear with an effortless economy of motion that was, if I'm being honest, actually beautiful to watch. She could read the sky. She knew where the trail got tricky before we got there. She knew which rocks were stable and which would shift. At one point on a steep section, she simply reached back her hand without looking, and I took it, and she pulled me up over a difficult ledge with one fluid motion. And then we were both standing on a ridge in the fading gold light, with the whole mountain valley spread below us, and she said, very quietly, "Worth it." Just those 2 words, but the way she said them, like she was letting me in on something private, hit somewhere unexpected. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out softer than I intended. "Yeah, it really is." She looked at me then, and this time she didn't look away quickly. I was the one who looked away. That night in my bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling of the lodge dorm, I told myself it was the altitude making me feel strange, the thinness of the air, the way the mountains made everything feel more vivid, more real, like the contrast had been turned up on the whole world. It was the mountains. It was definitely the mountains. I closed my eyes. Outside, the wind had started picking up. If you're still here, good, because we haven't even gotten to the part where the storm hits and everything changes. Stay with me. Drop a like right now so the algorithm knows you're invested. We're just getting started. Day 3 started with a sky the color of old pewter. I noticed it at breakfast. The other guests in the group, a couple from Denver, a retired teacher named Margaret who hiked like a machine, 2 friends from Austin who were, incredibly, more out of shape than me, didn't seem to notice. They were laughing about something, pouring coffee, arguing about whether the eggs were real or powdered. I noticed the sky, and then I noticed Nadia, standing at the window of the lodge with her coffee mug in both hands, not drinking it, looking out at the peaks with an expression I didn't have language for yet. I was still learning her face. It's different from learning words. Learning a face takes time, repetition, the patience to catch the same expression twice. This expression was alert, calculating, troubled in a way she was working to contain. She turned and found me watching her. "We should talk about the route," she said, and sat down across from me. The plan had been the Ridge Trail, a longer, more exposed route that the group had been building toward. Nadia pulled out the topo map and spoke quietly, not making a big production of it, while the rest of the group chatted around us. "Weather window is narrower than forecast," she said. "I want to do the Lower Valley Trail instead. Less elevation, more shelter." "The other guests are going to be disappointed. They've been excited about the ridge." "The other guests aren't reading the pressure drop. I'd rather disappoint them than put them in danger." "What about me?" I asked. "Am I disappointed?" She looked up from the map. "Are you?" I held her gaze. "Take me wherever you think is right." Something shifted in her expression, barely visible, like movement under still water. "Okay," she said. "Valley Trail. We go early and we come back early." What Nadia did not tell the group, what I only figured out later, was that she had already decided to take the Valley Trail and was going to do so regardless. What she was actually checking, when she sat down across from me, was whether I would back her up if the others pushed back. I didn't know yet that this was the first way she trusted me. The Valley Trail was stunning. Dense pines, frozen creek beds, the occasional glimpse of elk tracks in fresh snow. Margaret set a punishing pace, and the Denver couple complained cheerfully about their knees. I walked near the back, half in a writing trance, the kind where you're cataloging sensory details without consciously deciding to, storing them for later. Nadia ranged back and forth along the group, checking in, adjusting pace. She paused beside me sometimes and said things like, "Ice patch on the left," or "Slow down through here," without fanfare, like a quiet broadcast just for me. At one point, the creek we were following took a bend, and suddenly the valley opened into a clearing, a bowl of absolute white silence, the peaks surrounding it on 3 sides, the light diffuse and silver and extraordinary. Everyone stopped talking at once. "God," the woman from Denver said softly. I looked at Nadia. She was looking at the clearing with an expression I recognized, the same one I'd seen the evening before on the ridge. Worth it. Like something in her chest was paying out a debt. She felt me looking. "It never gets old," she said, and her voice was different from her usual measured tone, softer, unguarded. I wrote it down in my notebook later that night. She has 2 voices, the one she uses for everything and the one she uses for the mountains. I want to hear the second one more. The snow started at 2 in the afternoon. It started gently, soft, fat flakes, almost decorative. The group oohed appropriately. Margaret put her hand out to catch some. The Denver couple took photos. Nadia looked at the sky and did not take photos. "We're turning around," she said, and her voice had gone back to its professional register, clipped, decisive, no room for discussion. "Now, everyone, we head back the way we came, same pace or faster. Stay together." "It's just a little snow," one of the Austen friends started. "Now," Nadia repeated, and there was something in that single word that made everyone move without further argument. I moved. We all moved. The problem was, the storm moved faster. Within 20 minutes, the decorative flakes had become something serious, horizontal, stinging, driven by a wind that had appeared from nowhere and was gathering speed by the minute. Visibility dropped. The trail disappeared under fresh white. The temperature plummeted in that brutal way high altitude can manage, like a switch being thrown. Nadia made a decision I only understood later. The valley floor, the way we had come, would be safe for the group. They were closer to the lodge. She radioed ahead, gave coordinates, handed her compass, and detailed verbal instructions to Margaret, who had the most experience. She sent them back with explicit, step-by-step guidance, and then she looked at me. I had drifted too far back. In the confusion of the sudden storm and the group turning, I had somehow ended up on the wrong side of a creek crossing, a few feet of scramble that was trivial in good conditions and impossible now, ice forming on the rocks faster than I could believe. "Sarah," her voice cut through the wind, "don't move. Stay exactly where you are." She crossed to me in 3 controlled movements that shouldn't have been possible on that ice. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was iron. "There's an emergency shelter on the ridge, 200 meters up. We can't go back down. The crossing is too iced over and the storm's coming from the valley direction. We go up." "Up?" I stared at her. "Into the storm?" "The cabin will be on the lee side of the ridge. The storm won't hit as hard there." Her eyes locked on mine through the blowing snow. "Do exactly what I say and don't let go of me. Not for 1 second." Her hand on my back felt like fire in the freezing chaos, and I was terrified, genuinely terrified, that it wasn't just the cold making me shiver. "Okay," I said. "I've got you." Something in her face shifted, but the storm didn't give me time to read it. We ran. She sent the whole group back and stayed with me, alone, in a blizzard, going up into the storm. If this isn't the most heart-stopping thing you've heard today, smash that like button and keep going, because it gets so much better. The cabin was real. I had been half convinced it was a story Nadia was telling me to keep me moving, a reassuring fiction, like telling a child we're almost there when you have no idea how far you actually are. But 200 meters up a ridge in a blizzard feels like 200 miles, and by the time the dark shape of the emergency shelter materialized out of the white, I could have wept. It was small. 1 room, maybe 12 by 14 feet. A wood stove in the corner with emergency kindling stored in a metal box beside it. A narrow bunk bed bolted to one wall, heavy blankets and a vacuum-sealed bag on the bottom bunk. A small folding table, a bench. Emergency rations in a locked cabinet, key hanging on a hook beside it. A single small window on the east-facing wall, currently showing nothing but white. Nadia got the door shut against the wind and then stood with her back against it for 1 moment, just one, with her eyes closed, and I saw something pass across her face that she didn't know I was watching. Relief. And underneath it, the exhale of a person who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time. Then her eyes opened and she was Nadia again. "Are you injured?" she asked, moving immediately. "No, cold, wet, intact. Hypothermia risk. Get out of anything wet. She was already pulling out the emergency kit with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this before, not in a drill but in actual conditions. I did what I was told, stripped off my outer layer, my gloves, my hat, all soaked through. My hands had gone numb enough that the buckles were a problem. She came over without comment and undid them for me, fast and impersonal, like a medic. I stood there with my hands hanging useless and let her. It was the most intimate thing that had happened to me in 2 years, and it was a buckle on a jacket. That is the specific quality of my romantic life before Nadia, and I am not proud of it. She got the wood stove going with a speed that felt almost supernatural. Dry kindling, a match, careful building of the flame. Within 15 minutes, there was actual heat. Within 30, the cabin had gone from brutal to merely very cold. I sat on the bench, wrapped in 2 of the emergency blankets, and watched the fire through the little glass window in the stove door, and felt my hands start to ache as sensation returned. Nadia had radioed the lodge from outside, briefly, before the signal got too broken up by the storm. The group was safe. The storm was severe and tracking to last through tomorrow at minimum. We were to stay put. She didn't seem alarmed by this. I was alarmed enough for both of us. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. My voice came out slightly shaky from cold. She settled onto the bench across from me, parka still on, hands around one of the emergency ration pouches she'd heated on the stove. "Guiding?" 8 years. "Have you been stranded before?" "Twice." She looked at the fire. "Once on a glacier route in winter. Once on a technical climb. Different situation. Both times I got everyone out." "I notice you said everyone like you were the emergency." The corner of her mouth, that almost smile. "Someone has to be." "What happened on those other times?" She was quiet for a moment, and I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, "The glacier. A client panicked. Took off in the wrong direction. I went after her. We spent 18 hours in a snow cave." A pause. "The climb was my own fault. I made a judgment error. Got caught in a rock slide. Broke my arm in 2 places. Waited 14 hours for rescue." I stared at her. "You waited 14 hours with a broken arm?" "I had a book." I burst out laughing. It surprised me, the laugh. It came from somewhere genuine, somewhere that hadn't been reached in a while. And Nadia looked at me when I laughed with an expression I couldn't read, something careful and focused, like she was trying to preserve it in memory. "I'm sorry," I said, still catching my breath. "That's not funny." "It's a little funny," she said, and this time she actually smiled. A real one, small and private, but real. That was the first time I saw it, her real smile. I'm going to think about it for a long time. We talked through that first evening in the fitful, building way of 2 people who were strangers, slowly ceasing to be. First, the logistics, rations, water from snow melted in the pan, sleep rotation so someone was always monitoring the stove. Then, gradually, the other things. I told her I was a journalist. She asked what I wrote about. "Whatever my editor assigns me," I said, and heard the bitterness in my own voice and felt embarrassed by it. "What do you want to write about?" The question landed harder than she probably intended it to. Nobody had asked me that in years. "People," I said, finally. "Just people. The real stuff. The way we survive things and don't talk about it." She looked at me steadily. "Like being stranded in blizzards?" "Like being stranded in blizzards," I agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then, My mother died 2 years ago. I came back to the mountains after the funeral and I just stayed. I had been guiding part-time before. I made it full-time. I think I needed something that required my whole attention, so I couldn't think too much. It was the most personal thing she'd said to me in 3 days. I didn't rush it. I just said, "I understand that," using work as a place to hide. She looked at me, and this time the careful expression was gone, replaced by something more open, more vulnerable, like she hadn't expected to be understood. "Yeah," she said softly. "Exactly that." Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, the fire held. And somewhere in the space between us on that bench, something shifted. Not dramatically, not with trumpets, just the way ice shifts in spring, imperceptibly, and then all at once. She lost her mother and came back to the mountains to survive. I use work to hide from my life. 2 women, 2 kinds of wounds, 1 tiny cabin in a blizzard. Comment below, are you team they should kiss already, or team the slow burn is the point? And then keep reading, because night 1 isn't even the best part. I woke up wrong. That's the only way to describe it. Waking up wrong. My body felt heavy and strange, my thoughts sluggish, my fingers and toes disconnected from me in a way that was more than just cold. When I tried to sit up, the ceiling tilted. The stove had gone down. I could see the glow was barely there. I'd been on watch, and I'd fallen asleep, and the fire had dropped to coals, and the temperature in the cabin had plummeted while I slept. I knew it was bad. I just couldn't make my body cooperate with the knowledge. "Nadia." My voice came out blurred. She was awake instantly. She seemed asleep like a soldier, close to the surface. She sat up on the bunk and looked at me, and in 2 seconds was across the cabin with her hand on my face. "Hey, look at me." I tried. The ceiling was still doing things. "Sarah, look at me." I looked at her. Her dark eyes were sharp and focused and very close. "Mild hypothermia," she said, not to me, like she was confirming something to herself. Then, to me, "I need you to stay awake. Can you do that?" "Trying," I managed. She rebuilt the fire so fast it was almost violent. I could hear her moving, the clatter of wood, the flare as the kindling caught. Then she was back, pulling blankets off the bunk and wrapping them around me, and then she sat behind me on the bench and pulled me back against her chest and wrapped her arms around me and held on. "Is this okay?" she asked, quietly, right against my ear. "Yes," I said. I meant it in about 14 different ways simultaneously. She was warm. She was the warmest thing I had ever encountered. Or maybe the cold had recalibrated everything, but either way, the heat of her against my back was extraordinary, almost painful, the way warmth always hurts a little when it reaches somewhere that had gotten too cold. I stopped shivering by degrees. "Talk to me," she said. "Keep talking." "About what?" "Anything. What's the last thing you wrote that you were actually proud of?" It should have been an easy question. It wasn't. I had to search for it like looking for something in a darkened room, reaching carefully. 3 years ago, I finally said. A piece about this woman in Ohio. She'd lost her son in an accident and she'd started this support group for other parents, but she made them do crafts, like actual arts and crafts, origami and painting and stuff. And everyone thought it was ridiculous, and I went to write a kind of wry piece about it, and then I sat with these people for a day, and I just stopped. "What?" Her voice was quiet behind me. I understood what she was doing. You make something with your hands when language fails. You make something when you can't say it. I felt my throat tighten. It was the best thing I ever wrote. My editor cut it in half and ran it in the back of the magazine. Nadia's arms tightened slightly around me, a single, deliberate pressure. Not a hug, just, I heard you. I'm sorry, she said. It was a long time ago. Doesn't matter how long ago something was. Some things stay tender. I turned my head slightly to look at her, which brought our faces very close together. Is that from experience? Her jaw moved. My mother used to call me her mountain goat, she said, because I was always climbing things, trees, fences, her kitchen counters. She'd yell at me and then laugh. A pause. I still hear her laugh sometimes when I'm up high. I know it doesn't sound anything except like love, I said quietly. She looked at me in the firelight and didn't say anything for a moment that stretched long and soft. Your hands are warming up, she said finally. I know, but I didn't move away. Neither did she. We stayed like that for a long time. I don't know when I fell asleep again. I know that when I woke, it was still dark and still storming, and I was still against her, and her arms were still around me, and her breathing was slow and deep, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten the shape of it. Safe. Not just physically safe, the other kind. The kind where another person makes the world feel like a smaller, more manageable thing. I stared at the firelight and I was terrified by it. Not by her, by how much I didn't want to move. She held me through the entire night, both of us too scared to say anything out loud. And the storm is still going. Subscribe if you're not already, and keep going because we are almost at the part where everything breaks open. Day 2 in the cabin had a different texture than day 1. Day 1 was emergency. Day 2 was aftermath, which is sometimes harder because the adrenaline is gone, and what's left is just you and the thing you're trying not to think about. What I was trying not to think about? The feel of her arms, the specific warmth of her voice in the dark. The way she had said some things stay tender, like she was reading it from somewhere private inside herself. What Nadia was trying not to think about. Your guess is as good as mine, because she was back to being measured and professional and focused on practical tasks. Rationing the emergency food with precise fairness, monitoring the stove, checking the radio signal every hour. Immaculate and competent, and absolutely not looking at me any more than strictly necessary. Which I noticed. Because when someone stops looking at you after they've been looking at you, you feel the absence of it. By afternoon, I was restless. I started writing in my notebook, wrote about the clearing, about the mountain, about Margaret's inexhaustible knees, and wrote around the cabin and around Nadia without writing about them, the way you write around a bruise. What are you writing? She asked. She was mending a small tear in her pack strap with a needle and thread, not looking up. Notes. About what? The trip. Might turn it into a piece. She was quiet for a moment. Am I in it? The question was very carefully casual. Should you be? I asked. I'm asking. Would you want to be? She looked up from the pack. I don't know. I don't typically want people writing about me. Then I won't. I didn't say that. We looked at each other. The fire popped. Nadia, I said. Thank you. For last night. You probably saved my life, and I didn't say it clearly. Her jaw tightened. It's my job. I felt that like a small slap. Right, I said. Of course. That's not... She stopped herself. No, it's fine. You're right. It's what you're paid for. I don't know why I pushed it, except that I do know. I pushed it because I was scared of how much I'd felt in the dark. And I wanted her to be just a professional so I could stop feeling it. I was setting up the distance deliberately, like a controlled burn. She set down the pack strap. Sarah. It's fine, Nadia. It's not... She stopped again, and when she spoke, her voice was lower, controlled but barely. Do you actually think I'd have stayed all night if it were just the job? Do you think I'd... She stopped again, breathed. And then the cabin groaned. Not a small sound, a full, structural sound, the kind that comes from above, from the roof, from weight that has been accumulating silently while we weren't paying attention. A crack followed by a rush, and then the section of the roof above the far corner buckled, and a chunk of it, timber and snow and cold air, came down. We moved simultaneously. Nadia grabbed the emergency kit, I grabbed both packs. We pressed ourselves against the sturdier near wall as the far corner rained debris and snow, and a blast of outside air howled through the new gap. It happened in about 5 seconds. Then it was over. A 3-foot section of the roof was gone, replaced by screaming winter sky. Snow poured in. We stood pressed together against the wall, breathing hard. Her hand had found my arm, and she was gripping it. I was gripping back. Our faces were very close. The cold from the new gap was immediate and brutal. We need to block it, she said, but she didn't move for a second. Okay, I said. I didn't move either. We were pressed together against the wall of a partially collapsed emergency cabin in a blizzard, and her face was 2 inches from mine, and she had been about to say something before the roof intervened. Nadia, I said, what were you going to say? Before. Her eyes on mine were very dark in the firelight. That it wasn't just the job. A long pause. Last night was... I don't do that. I kept my arms around you because I wanted to, not because protocol said to. The snow was pouring through the broken roof. The wind was screaming. She was watching me with that careful, preserving expression, like she was trying to save this moment too. Okay, I said softly. Okay, she repeated. We blocked the gap with the heavy blankets and nailed them in place with tent stakes from her pack. We moved the table under the sturdier part of the remaining roof. We did all the practical things. And the whole time, something new and undeniable was humming between us, warm as the stove, brighter than the fire. The real storm was inside, and neither of us was running from it anymore. The roof literally collapsed. The universe said stop avoiding each other and sent structural failure. Share this story. Someone in your life needs to hear about Sarah and Nadia right now. And stay, because the confession chapter is next. I wrote it at 2 a.m, and I have no regrets. The storm broke on the morning of day 3. You could feel it before you could see it. A shift in the pressure of the air, a softening of the wind's register from scream to moan to finally something almost like quiet. I woke to that quiet and lay still for a moment, listening to it, and then turned my head to look at the small east-facing window. Light, real light. Not the gray-white diffusion of stormlight, but actual directional sunlight, hitting the snow outside and turning everything into something sharp and blazing and new. Nadia was already awake. She was sitting at the table with the radio, attempting to raise the lodge. I watched her for a moment before she knew I was watching. She had a certain quality in unobserved moments, a stillness that wasn't blankness but was more like depth, like still water that goes a long way down. "Morning," I said. She looked over, and she looked at me the way she'd been trying not to look at me for the past 3 days, fully, without the careful management of it. "Storm's breaking," she said. "I think we can move in a few hours, once I can confirm the trail is safe." "Okay." She turned back to the radio, adjusted the frequency. "Sarah?" "Yeah?" A pause that had weight in it. "I'd like to say something, and I want you to just let me finish before you say anything." "Okay." She set down the radio and turned to face me fully. Her hands were flat on the table. Her voice was measured in the way of someone who has written the speech inside their head and is delivering it carefully. "I'm not good at this. I want to say that first so you understand what you're working with. I've been alone for 2 years, and I think I convinced myself I preferred it because it was easier than the alternative, which is being open. Like this." She looked at her hands. "But the last 3 days with you have been the most real I've felt since my mother died. That's not a romantic thing. I'm saying it as a fact. Being around you makes things feel more actual, more present." She looked up. "I don't know what to do with that except tell you." I sat very still through all of it. Then I said, "Can I say something now?" "Yeah." "I came to the mountains running," I said. "I've been running from my own life for about 2 years, maybe longer, and I got very good at making it look like productivity. Assignments, articles, being useful." I held her gaze. "And then I got stranded in a blizzard with a woman who reads the sky and knows where the trail gets difficult before you get there, and waits 14 hours with a broken arm and a book. And I stopped running. For the first time in 2 years, I just stopped." "Sarah, I'm not finished." My voice was steady. I was surprised. "I've been afraid of what I feel around you because it felt too fast and too real, and I didn't think I was someone who deserved things that felt this real anymore. That's the honest version." Silence. Then she was crossing the cabin in 3 steps, and she was right in front of me, and her hands came up and cupped my face, and she looked at me for one long, checking moment, making absolutely sure. And I didn't look away, and then she kissed me. Soft first, careful, like a question. I answered it. The kiss changed. It stopped being a question and became something else, something with warmth and history in it, the history of 3 days and the history of 2 years of loneliness each, all of it present in this small, heated space between us. Her hands in my hair, my hands gripping the front of her parka, the wood stove crackling softly in the corner. When we broke apart, the light through the east window had changed angle. Actual morning. Clear sky. She pressed her forehead against mine. Her eyes were closed. "I'm very bad at this," she said quietly. "I said that already." "You're doing fine," I told her. "Yeah?" "Yeah." I turned my face slightly and kissed the scar through her eyebrow. She went very still. "You're doing really, really fine." She pulled back enough to look at me. Her real smile, the small private one, was there. Unguarded, present. "Let's get off this mountain," she said. "Let's," I agreed. but neither of us moved for another several minutes. The radio crackled, and the lodge answered, and Nadia confirmed we were safe, and the route was clearing, and we'd be down by early afternoon. She sounded completely professional and completely herself. Only I could see the slight color in her face. Only I knew to look. We packed up the cabin together, careful, methodical, the way she did everything. She checked the stove twice, locked the supply cabinet, patched the blanket-blocked roof gap as best we could. At the door, she stopped and looked around the cabin once. The firelight was gone, the stove cool, the 2 narrow bunks with their compressed blanket bags restored. 12 by 14 feet of emergency wood and function. "This cabin has a story now," I said. She looked at me. "Yeah." "A good one." "Yeah," she said again, softer. Then she opened the door, and the Colorado morning came in, cold and bright and absolutely still in the way that only comes after a major storm, like the world exhaling. We walked down the mountain. Her hand found mine on a difficult section of ice trail and didn't let go when the trail got easier. I left it there. She cupped my face. She kissed the scar through her eyebrow. I literally cannot. Comment your favorite line from this story. I genuinely want to know. And stay for the epilogue. Weeks later. Soft. Domestic. The porch moment. You are not skipping it. 6 weeks later, I was on a train. Not running this time. Going toward. The difference feels obvious now. It wasn't then, not for a long time, but something about 3 days in a 12 by 14 cabin with a woman who reads the sky had recalibrated me enough to know the difference between motion as escape and motion as arrival. This was the second kind. My heart knew it before my brain confirmed it. That lighter, more frightened in a good way feeling of moving towards something real. In the 6 weeks since the mountain, I had done a few things. I filed a resignation from the magazine, not dramatically, no speech, no tears, no artisan soap references, just a quiet, clear email that said this was the right time and I was going to try something else. My editor had responded with a longer email than I expected, something that suggested he'd seen it coming for longer than I had. I pitched a book proposal to 3 publishers. The thesis: a year of stories about how people survive extraordinary moments and what those moments teach them about ordinary life. The Ohio woman and her origami. The people who stay. What we make with our hands when language fails. 2 of the 3 publishers had responded. I called my sister, who I hadn't spoken to properly in 8 months, and talked to her for 2 hours, and cried twice, and felt like a human being afterward. And I called Nadia. We had talked, really talked, for the 6 weeks since the mountain. Not every day, not in any pattern I had planned, just when one of us had something to say and said it. She was not a long-form phone person. Her messages were brief and precise and occasionally made me laugh out loud in public. She had sent me once, without any explanation, a photo of the Ridge Trail in clear weather, the clearing we'd seen on day 1 of the hike, the bowl of white silence, the peaks surrounding it on 3 sides. In good light, it was extraordinary, heartbreaking. I had looked at it for a long time. Then I booked the train. The mountains in January were different than November. Harder light, deeper cold, a particular quality of stillness that November didn't have. Holloway in winter was smaller and quieter, the lodge itself nearly empty, off-season. The handwritten chalkboard was gone. The fire in the lobby was going. Nadia was sitting in one of the chairs by it. She stood up when she saw me come through the door, which, I don't have the word for it, actually. She stood up like someone who had been waiting and was done waiting. "You're early," she said. "Train was on time for once in its life." She took one step toward me, then stopped. That checking look, making sure. I crossed the remaining distance myself. She caught me. Her arms came around me, and I felt the same thing I had felt in the cabin, in the dark, in the cold, safe. The other kind. The kind that goes all the way down. "I told Margaret you were coming," she said into my hair. "She says she expected it." "Margaret is terrifyingly perceptive." She really is. I pulled back enough to look at her. She looked the same strong jaw, the same careful dark eyes, the scar through her brow. She looked like herself. She looked like someone I had been missing with a specificity I hadn't known was possible for 6 weeks. "I resigned," I told her. Something moved in her face. "I know. You told me." "I'm pitching a book." "I know. I might need to interview you." "For the book?" "And for other reasons." The corner of her mouth, the almost smile, then the real one just behind it. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you the porch." The porch was around the back of the lodge, facing east, facing the peaks. It had 2 chairs and a view I had not seen in November because it was always either dark or we were on the trail. In January, mid-afternoon, the low winter sun hit the snowfields on the peaks and turned them into something molten and extraordinary. Gold pouring over white, the shadows in the valley a deep and perfect blue. We sat in the 2 chairs. She brought tea. We didn't talk for a while. I had my notebook, but I didn't open it. At some point, she reached over and her hand covered mine on the armrest. No announcement, no fanfare. Just her hand on mine, warm and present. "I've been thinking," she said, looking at the peaks. "Yeah?" "That story you want to write, about surviving things?" She paused. "I think you're actually writing about something else." I waited. "About coming back," she said. "Not surviving. Everyone talks about surviving. Coming back. After. The choosing to come back." I sat with that for a moment, with the cold and the golden light and her hand on mine. "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly it." She looked over at me. "So write it." "I will." "And you can interview me," a pause, "for the book." "And for other reasons," I said. "And for other reasons," she agreed. The sun dropped behind the westernmost peak and the light changed, turned softer. The cold sharpened slightly. Neither of us moved to go in. Her hand didn't move. Mine didn't either. I looked at the mountains, the serious, enormous, quiet mountains, and I felt something settle in my chest that I recognized after a moment as myself. The version of myself that had been mislaid somewhere between the blinking cursor and the artisan soap and the 2 in the morning ramen. She had been here the whole time, apparently, waiting in the mountains, waiting for a storm, waiting for someone to stop running and come back. "Nadia," I said. "Yeah." "Thank you for keeping me warm." A beat. "And for the other things." She turned her face toward me and she kissed me, soft and unhurried and tasting of the tea, with the peaks behind her and the cold and the light and the particular silence that comes only after storms. When we broke apart, her forehead was against mine again. "Stay longer than a week this time," she said. "I was thinking I'd stay through February," I said. Her breath went out in something that was almost a laugh, and also wasn't. Yeah? If that's yes, she said, firmly. That's. I smiled. She smiled. The real one, wide open. The one I'd been collecting in secret since the lodge lobby with my boots. The mountains held their silence. The peaks burned gold. I was not running. I was home. If this story hit you somewhere real, please share it. Someone in your life is going through something and they need this right now. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and comment below. The next one is already in progress. Thank you for staying. You are the reason these stories get told.